Thank you for joining us for part 2 of It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People by Dr. Ramani Durvasula, PhD. In part 1, we talked about the nuts and bolts of what is narcissism, what is the clinical definition, and what are some prominent features and behavioral patterns associated with narcissism. If you haven't listened to part 1, definitely check it out. For part 2, we are going to really delve into narcissistic abuse. What are the red flags? What are some of the common phrases that narcissistic abusers will employ in a relationship? And importantly, how can you protect yourself and how can you get out from a bad, toxic, narcissistic relationship? So let's dive right in to part 2 of It's Not You. Narcissism abuse. What is it? From Dr. Ramani herself. Narcissistic abuse can be defined as harmful, deceitful, invalidating patterns in interpersonal relationships, behaviors, and alternation between disruptions of safety and trust. And another thing is periods of normalcy and enjoyment, and then kind of pivoting to antagonism. So that's going to be a lot of the common traits of narcissism is this sort of split, right? It's this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Things are going okay one moment, and then the next, they're really not okay. You're getting the silent treatment. You don't know what's wrong. So what are some of the big traits of narcissistic abuse? Gaslighting, this is the kind of the focal centerpiece of narcissistic abuse, and it operates in a very systemic pattern. So like what? Doubt about your experiences, memory, perception, judgment, and emotions. And it can cause someone who is suffering at the hand of a narcissistic abuser to really question reality and feel like they are just taking crazy pills. Other patterns of abuse from narcissistic people, the domination patterns. Abuse from narcissists, it's all about domination. And why? Well, because at their core, truly, they're actually really, really insecure and have feelings of inadequacy. And because of that, they are doing everything that they can do to not feel shame and to stay on top. So what does that look like? Some of these domination patterns. They need to control schedules, appearances, financial decisions, and the narrative. These are classical tenets of narcissistic behavior. Narcissistic abuse often, it'll isolate people. What does that look like? Well, a lot of times narcissists will they'll criticize your family, your friends, your workplace, your work. And when you're with those people, our narcissists will often, in the company of those people, if they don't deem them as important or anyone that they want to control, they'll behave in a manner that is quite frankly insulting and rude. And a narcissistic person, they might also tell you falsehoods about people close to you so that you question their loyalty and friendship. Because the thing that the narcissist wants to do is to dominate, to isolate, and to say, I am the one in control. You need me. All these other people, you don't need them. Deprivation. Narcissistic people give time or closeness only when there's a tangible payout, which means that often their relationships are different types of transactional relationships that aren't rooted in real intimacy. Okay, so now you're aware of some of the patterns of this abusive behavior. Here is something that's really, really important. There's actually a narcissistic relationship cycle. And narcissistic relationships, without fail, will follow this cycle. So what is it? It's a cycle that often begins with charm, intensity, idealization, or a pattern, and something I'm sure you've heard before called love bombing, that will draw us in. And then gradually, this idealized mask, it'll fall off. And the expectable patterns of devaluation and discard will kick in. So starts off with love bombing, sort of this idealized, overly romantic honeymoon period, but then the mask comes off, and you can think of it as frogs in the pot of boiling water. You don't necessarily know how bad it is until you're like, oh my God, it's boiling. And in that part of the cycle, there are patterns of devaluation where your partner's devaluing you. And then eventually they'll want to discard you. They're just like, we're going to break up for the umpteenth time. They're just breaking up with you every single week. And then that cycle, and then it turns into hoovering, where they're trying to bring you back in. And then some version of the initial love bombing will start again, but it won't be that like just grade A, wonderful love bombing. It'll be some version of it, just enough breadcrumbing to get you back in. And then they will devalue you, and then they will discard you. And then it starts again and again and again and again. And this is the cycle. So if you feel like you're in something, if this sounds familiar, you might be in a narcissistic relationship. But as always, we like to end on a hopeful note here at Bookwise. How can you wrap yourself in bubble wrap to prevent yourself from these just really, really toxic narcissistic people, from this kind of toxic abuse and relationship dynamics? Well, number one, make yourself gaslight resistant. You know what? You got to trust your gut. If something feels wrong, if something just in your body just doesn't feel right, you should trust it. Here's another big one. And this can be really, really heartbreaking, because here's the thing about narcissists. They have people in their lives who are enablers. You have to become aware of them, but you also have to accept the fact that it's sad that people that you thought were your friends, or people who were in your orbit when you were with this narcissist who you thought cared about you, if they're an enabler, for whatever reason, they want to keep the status quo, they want to uphold the narcissist, and they want to kind of not believe you or villainize you or disregard what you're saying. You got to live and let learn, and just understand that those people weren't your friends in the first place. And it's a really, really hard pill to swallow, but it's important. And if all else fails, Dr. Ramani does suggest something called going no contact. You don't take their calls. You don't reply to their texts. You don't talk to them. You basically disappear from their lives. And sometimes it gets extreme. You might even have to block their number or email or social media accounts. I know it sounds heavy-handed, but it is the most effective tool to just end this toxic cycle. As Mariah Carey once said, I don't know her. I don't know her. So you've got to channel your Mariah Carey, channel your Mimi, and just say, I don't know her.
Und was ist mit J-Lo?
Die kenne ich nicht.
Oops.
In summation, I'm going to leave everybody with a version of a quote from Stuart Smalley. And I want you to remember this, especially if you are in a narcissistic situation. I'm going to tell you right now, there is hope. There is hope. So you're strong, you're powerful. And to quote Stuart Smalley,
Daily Affirmation with Stuart Smalley.
You're good enough.
Because I'm good enough.
You're smart enough.
I'm smart enough.
And doggone it, people like you.
And doggone it, people like me.
So we have come, my friends, to the end of this ultimate guide to narcissism, where we have taken you through this fantastic book from Dr. Ramani, It's Not You. I am Britt Brewer, AKA Dr. Books. This has been another episode of Bookwise from bookclub.com. And as always, folks, stay safe, stay free of toxic people who want to dim your light. Stay bright, you shiny thing, you. And happy reading.